for those of you who are not familiar, the Long-Term Care Community Coalition, we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization entirely dedicated to improving care and quality of life for residents in nursing homes and in assisted living. The focus of our work, and we were founded in 1989, is on policy, research, and analysis. And based upon that research and analysis, we do systems advocacy to improve, again, of course, care and quality of life, dignified treatment for individuals in residential care settings. Over the past dozen years or so, we've been doing more and more public education programs such as this, which we host every month. We have a really, I think, terrific project now, a family empowerment and outreach program that's especially targeted to helping people create and sustain family councils. And we're also the proud home to 2 local long-term care ombudsman programs. All of our materials are on our website, nursinghomes411.org. Everything is free to use and to share. Next slide, please. Thanks. So without further ado, I want to get started with today's program. And today's webinar is with Julian Rich. He's going to talk about what makes a case senior care litigation from an expert witness's perspective. And Julian is he's a former nursing home administrator. He was a nursing home administrator, I think, for most of your career, Julian, if I'm getting that right. And over the last couple of years, Julian has served as an expert witness. And the reason why I wanted to have Julian, we've talked and we've worked with Julian here and there over the years and talked with him many times over the years, is that one, he has some really tremendous insights, but I thought also it's not so much about making a legal case necessarily for nursing, for a nursing home litigation, but to help families, to help residents, long-term care ombudsmen, attorneys, and others who work with families and residents to understand how to better substantiate when there is something wrong in their facility, when there's a case of an incidence of neglect or abuse. Because a lot of what we hear from people, especially families and oftentimes long-term care ombudsmen, is that something bad has happened or something bad is happening. It's a matter of effectively advocating for a resolution. And that's, especially we want people to be able to advocate within a facility and get things resolved as quickly and efficiently as possible. So I think that Julian's insights could be really valuable here. Just a quick reminder again, before we hand it over to Julian, that please use the chat if you have comments, if you want to say hello, if you're having technical difficulties, we'll try to respond to that. Please use the Q&A if you have any questions. We're not able to respond to raised hands. So if you have a comment, put it in the chat. If you have a question, put it in the Q&A, please. And with that, we're going to get started. Next slide, please. This is just a little bit about Julian. Oh, and you gave your contact information. Thank you, Julian. And then next slide, please. And again, this will be available on our website. So this is our agenda, types of facilities and distinguishing factors. Well, I'll hand it over to you, Julian. I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you very much, Richard. Yeah. And thanks to everyone at LTCCC for giving me the opportunity to talk about what I do and the passion I've developed for my work. In addition to the information that was on the presenter page, I thought I would mention that I started out actually in hospital administration and switched to the senior care world in 1978. Believe it or not, in college, I was an orderly in a nursing home, which of course dates me because now everyone is a nursing assistant. But that experience added a major dimension to my success as a nursing home or a senior care executive. And of course, that has impacted my work as an expert. About 10 years ago, I decided that I was no longer going to operate facilities on a full-time basis. I had operated one particular facility in Haverhill, Massachusetts, a good nonprofit with an excellent reputation with the state. I was there for almost 17 years, but it was time for a change. I had done a little bit of expert work, and it really fascinated me to the point where now, at any particular time, I've got 30 or so cases. I've had well over 100 cases in my years of doing this. And Initially, I was approached by a company called Arthur Shore and Associates that focused on hospital expert work. And Arthur Shore was like myself, a graduate at George Washington University, and was looking for someone that could be the senior care expert. We developed a relationship, and since then, he sold his company to a company that is called Hospital Experts, and I still have a relationship with them, but I also do work on my own as well. So that is kind of how I became an expert. And now, in addition to some consulting and some periodic interim work, my career focus is doing expert work. So let me start with the types of facilities and distinguishing factors. Next slide, please. So I've listed the various types of facilities that I provide expertise to. First of all, continuing care retirement communities or life care communities. I will say that it is very rare that cases have come to me that would fall under the umbrella of continuing care retirement communities, primarily because most of those communities are operated by nonprofit organizations. And I will talk a little bit as we go on about the so-called nonprofit difference. I can say in the 100+ cases that I have had only one case come to my attention against a nonprofit facility, and I didn't take the case because, frankly, it was a clinical issue, and I'm not a clinician, and I will talk a little bit about that later on. My primary focus in my expert work is nursing homes, which of course ties into LTCCC, and I would say the bulk of my cases are related to pressure wounds and falls, but I've also had some other cases. Believe it or not, I am on my second murder case, a resident-to-resident murder case. It's shocking, but this is my second one. And I've also had some other cases where there was elopement and amputations and so forth. But the bulk of the cases are pressure wounds and, as I mentioned before, falls. Assisted living is a whole different world, and the picture that I'm showing you kind of reflects these beautifully decorated and nicely appointed assisted living facilities that do a wonderful job of marketing and attracting residents. However, one of the major issues in the assisted living cases that I take, if not the major issue, is that there are many people that are enticed to come into assisted living facilities that really belong in nursing homes. And assisted living facilities, all too often, as part of their marketing efforts, are making promises to be able to provide similar care that a skilled nursing facility or a nursing home is able to provide. And it doesn't always work that way. And as I'm sure many, if not all of you know, assisted living facilities is all an out-of-pocket expense. And if care needs increase, which could happen literally overnight, assisted living management will often add charges to the monthly fees as well to provide care that, as I indicated before, in some cases are better placed in a nursing home. I've also done cases in rehabilitation facilities, post-acute facilities, and other kinds of post-acute facilities, such as group homes, subsidized senior housing, and so forth. But the vast majority of my cases are definitely nursing home cases. But I have to say, when I have an assisted living case that comes to me, I kind of perk up because of the issues that I mentioned before. Let me go over some of the characteristics. Obviously, nursing homes are the most regulated of all the types of facilities. And assisted living regulations are all too often very vague, if they exist at all. The federal regulations for nursing homes, the state regulations for nursing homes generally parrot the nursing home regulations that are federal regulations. And I tend to focus on the federal regulations and looking at my cases. I also am interested in looking at admission criteria, especially in terms of assisted living facilities. And many of these assisted living facilities are claiming to provide memory care. And I'm always a little bit apprehensive to study what that really means in terms of the kind of people that they admit and their ability to take care of people that would fall into a memory care facility whose care needs increase as they age. Um, Also, as I mentioned before, it's very rare for a nonprofit facility to come to my attention. Most of my years were in the nonprofit sector, and nonprofit facilities are generally more mission oriented, and the for-profit facilities, of course, have to perform that juggling act of being profitable versus providing quality care. And as you can understand, in all of my cases, money becomes an issue, profitability becomes an issue, and I'll talk more about that in the next slide. So, next slide, please. This is the engagement process that I go through. If I'm contacted by an attorney, and fortunately, I'm glad to say that I have a wonderful network of attorneys that I work with on a consistent basis. And I always offer the opportunity, whether it's someone I know or someone I don't know, to provide a courtesy consultation to make sure that we're on the same page. I like to be able to obtain some basic information about the case so that I can have an understanding of the fact pattern. Often a case has already been, a complaint has been submitted, so the process of adjudication has begun. And normally the complaint will give me some idea of the fact pattern in the case. If the case has not yet been actually a claim has not yet been submitted, then I like to see some sort of basic facts so that I can prepare a courtesy consultation. And in my courtesy consultation, I will talk about the apparent regulatory issues. I'll talk about the possibility, not the possibility, it's almost always the case that there are staffing issues. I like to look at different types of contracts, say with the medical director, to see if the medical director is performing his or her obligations. I'm also very curious about arbitration agreements because that has become an issue all too often in nursing home agreements. If there is an arbitration agreement that exists, I feel that I must point out to the attorney that that arbitration agreement is signed practically under duress. When a person is being admitted to a facility, they're signing one document after another. Often the staff person is not even aware of what an arbitration agreement means and cannot necessarily explain that. So I will say to the attorney, if there's an arbitration agreement, there are issues that can potentially negate the necessity of bringing an arbitration agreement into the into the facility. So regarding the regulatory compliance assessment, at this point, I'm generally engaged by the attorney to move forward. I look at, as I mentioned before, the federal regulations, which again, the state regulations parrot the federal regulations. And I'm also very interested in seeing the survey history of the particular facility, because all too often, in the case of a nursing home, there have been deficiencies cited in compliance surveys that come up in my assessment of the compliance issues in a particular case. If there are issues that have been cited before and a plan of correction does not follow, that may potentially help to strengthen the case. But it's very important to me to look at the survey history, not just during the year or the time that a resident is in a facility, but also the year before and the year after, to see if there are trends or consistent issues that are worthy of mention in my assessment. I also consider the Medicare cost reports to be integral to my assessment of a particular case. And as some of you know, the Medicare cost report does not just break down the nursing home operating costs, it also shows profitability. And there is one particular page that I focus on very carefully, which is related party transactions, because very often, and you see that big dollar sign on the slideshow and all the question marks surrounding it, the related party transactions tells me that ownership is taking money, taking resources out of a facility that go directly into their pocket. That can be in the form of paying rent to a realty company that the nursing home owners also own. I had one particular case where 10% of the facility expenses were being paid in rent to a realty company that was, again, owned by the owner of the facility as well, who also owned the realty company. Management contracts are also often written, and that is explained in the Medicare cost report. And management contracts are another way that ownership is able to take money out of the facility. The contract itself may stipulate that certain services are being provided. However, I like to be able to see evidence of those services being provided. And often all I'm seeing is money being taken out of the facility to pay to ownership for a management contract. And there is no evidence that that contract is being adjudicated in some way. Other kinds of related party transactions might be nursing home owners also owning a supply company, a therapy company. I have one particular case right now, an active case, where the owners of this nursing home were using agencies to fill staff positions, and they owned the agency, which to me makes no sense at all, except, again, a way in which money can go to ownership. And when you look at a Medicare cost report, the last page will show whether a facility was profitable or not. And some of these owners will claim that they are losing money, but then when you look at the money that they're taking out of the facility for management contracts or payment to realty companies or other related party transactions, you find that the money that they're taking out is well in excess of the so-called loss that they're reporting. So the Medicare cost reports are extremely important to my assessment of a particular case. And of course, staffing, and I have to give kudos to LTCCC because I often use their staffing information to assess the extent to which a facility is short-staffed. I also like to be able to look at registered nurses versus licensed practical nurses, because licensed practical nurses are much less expensive, approximately 25 to 30% than registered nurses. Yet registered nurses have a much more sophisticated scope of practice, and that scope of practice allows them to do things that LPNs generally are not able to do. And that can manifest itself in terms of the quality of assessments, the quality of supervision, the quality of care that's being rendered. The impact also of short staffing, I don't think there's any need to go into major detail in that regard. But needless to say, a facility that's short-staffed is much more vulnerable to compliance issues and deficiencies and quality of care problems than a facility that's well-staffed. And that also makes some implications in terms of staff training, the use of agency staff. one of the issues that I find is that, of course, with COVID, agency staff has become much more prominent. And agency staff are very often just thrown into a situation with any kind of orientation, any kind of training. A good facility will have some sort of an orientation packet to give to agency staff, so at least they have a sense of policies and procedures. And speaking of policies and procedures, attorneys often will talk about the standard of care. The standard of care in a facility is based on regulations, but most importantly, the standard of care is defined by policies and procedures that facility is operating under. That is their standard of care. And as part of my analysis, I like to be able to see as many policies and procedures as possible that apply to the fact pattern in a case relating to falls management, for example, or related to treatment of pressure wounds. I also mentioned before the importance of looking at contractual relationships, especially with the medical director. How much is the medical director involved in making sure that quality care is being provided, looking at policies and procedures, and approving on an annual basis policies and procedures with the director of nurses and with the administrator. Also, outsourced services, whether it's housekeeping or food services. The facility is still ultimately responsible for everything that goes on with their facilities. And sometimes outsourced services come into play in some of my cases. For example, in the case of a COVID case where the facility did a fairly decent job of implementing policies and practices during COVID. However, it did not translate to the housekeeping company. And it appears from my assessment of this case that the housekeeping company was responsible for spreading COVID throughout the facility. Anyway, regarding ownership may have facilities that are also substandard. And I like to look at ownership practices in other facilities to determine whether there are trends. All too often, I'm seeing ownership where there are several facilities involved and there are consistent issues with deficiencies, trends that extend throughout all of ownership. How are we doing so far? Next slide, please.
Thank you. It's very interesting. Thank you.
All right, hold on one second. Yeah, I just there was some background noise I wanted to change. In spite of what I've gone over before, there still is the issue of do all these quality of care issues and quality of life issues and issues with facility acquired pressure wounds or deterioration of bed sores. Does this mean that whatever the outcome of the resident was that is bringing this case forward, does that mean that these things have caused this outcome, whether it's a person dying or their overall quality of life deteriorating dramatically? So that becomes a major issue in my cases. I am not a clinician. If I'm sometimes questioned in deposition or in trial that I have no right to comment on clinical issues. First of all, I do have a clinician that I work very, very closely with, someone that not only became a registered nurse and a director of nurses, and also had her license as an administrator. And that helps me to pinpoint issues of a clinical nature that are reflected in the documentation or lack of documentation. So if I am questioned by a defense attorney when I'm representing a plaintiff, My response is no, I'm not a clinician. I'm not a physician. I'm not a registered nurse. I'm not a former director of nurses. I'm not a therapist. However, with 40 plus years of experience, we can let the jury decide whether my opinion has validity, and I can justify anything that has a clinical bent in my offering my opinions. I also like to be able to validate some of those opinions by going to sources other than the nursing home itself. For example, let's say someone falls, the facility sends that person out to a hospital emergency room. And when you look at the emergency room report and the hospital chart, you find that they talk about the person coming dehydrated with infected wounds. I've had cases, very sad cases, where a person falls. It's an unwitnessed fall, and there is no neurological checks to determine whether there may be a head injury, and a person may subsequently die of a subdural hematoma. My point is that hospital records are very important to validate some of the issues in the case, some of the quality care issues. And I also may want to go into review of documentation prior to a person being admitted to a nursing home or assisted living facility, which may indicate fall risks, potential skin breakdowns, and other things that may not necessarily have been addressed. Am I talking too fast or going okay?
I think it's fine, Julian. Good, Kelly, I'm sorry.
Nope,
Okay.
that's all. I was just going to say it sounds good.
Okay, thank you. So as we move towards the judgment, so to speak, most of my cases will require a written report where I detail my assessment of the deviations from the regs, the lack of compliance with the standard of care in the form of policies, staffing issues, financial issues, as I described previously in the Medicare cross report. But not all states, for example, Florida does not require an expert report. Sometimes certain states will have the attorney develop what they call an expert disclosure, which is them writing a report that would be very similar to my doing the report myself. And that's something that I would obviously work on together with the attorney. The next step in the process will be that I might be deposed. And I'll talk from the perspective of plaintiffs representing a plaintiff. The majority of my cases are plaintiff cases. And frankly, I enjoy being on the side of justice. And I'm sure some of my buddies out there that are still operating facilities are saying, well, he must have gone to the dark side because he's representing plaintiffs. But frankly, I'm sick and tired of hearing what I hear and reading what I read about substandard facilities that are grossly neglecting people. And that has helped me to develop a great deal of energy and passion for plaintiff cases. But I do take defense cases if I feel it's a defense case worth taking. So let's say I'm deposed on a case and it's a plaintiff case. The defense attorneys will do their best to discredit my opinions, make me look bad. Sometimes the relationship in deposition becomes a bit adversarial. Most of the depositions nowadays are by Zoom, but over the years I've had a number of in-person depositions. I can think of one particular attorney, defense attorney, who was paying for my deposition and held up the check and said to me, if you don't give more specific answers, I'm sick and tired of your vague answers. I will tear up this check, which was kind of intimidating at the time. But again, my point is that in deposition, when I'm representing a plaintiff, the defense attorneys will try to make you look bad to strengthen their position. The vast majority of cases are settled before trial. However, I must say, I would much rather be on the stand testifying and facing a jury than going through a deposition, because there's much more decorum in a courtroom. In fact, on sort of a humorous note, if I'm testifying in a trial and I'm in a courtroom and I have to go up on the stand, I think of Marissa Tomei and my cousin Vinny, and I get a smile on my face, and that's kind of relaxing. But I would much rather be testifying in court than being beat up in a deposition, so to speak. But almost all these cases do get settled prior to trial, sometimes even prior to deposition. And this is basically the process that I go through in most of my cases. Next slide, please. Allocation of resources, as I mentioned earlier, there are owners that are pulling money out of a facility that goes right into their pocket in the form of related party transactions or management contracts. However, there is a federal regulation that says that the administrator is ultimately responsible for allocation of resources so that the facility is maintained in compliance and that quality care is being provided. And I cite that federal regulation in practically every single case that comes to my attention. I'd like to mention COVID because of how it has impacted nursing homes on a negative note. There's money that has come into facilities, and there are owners that basically took that money and took advantage of the money that came into their pockets. It did not necessarily provide appropriate staffing. And if they claimed that they were not able to get staff or had to use expensive agencies, my question then becomes, well, what did you do? Did you provide a finder's fee to your existing staff? Did you increase your advertising? What did you do to get more staff other than just take that money and put it in your pocket? I am very careful about taking COVID cases, especially if these are cases that came up early in COVID, where there was a lot of confusion. Those of you in the audience, think back to the early days of COVID, where you were wiping off your groceries and changing your clothes in the garage and so forth. My point is, early in COVID, there were a lot of facilities that did not know what to do. I can think of facilities that I know very well, high quality facilities, well-respected facilities that had numerous cases of COVID and deaths that resulted from COVID because there just wasn't much guidance. But as COVID went on and vaccines came into play, and the federal government and the state governments began to pass on more and more information, it in some ways made it easier to look at a case that was well beyond when COVID was becoming more of a mature issue, so to speak, and look at those cases from the perspective of facilities by then knowing what to do and how to do it. Other issues that I might mention is that I am based in Massachusetts. So I obviously I have to be kind of careful in taking cases that are plaintiff cases. I don't want to be across the table with someone that is, for example, a member of an organization I've been very involved in, the American College of Healthcare Administrators. And I've been very active in that organization. And fortunately, of all the cases I've taken, there has only been one instance where a member of that organization was the administrator of the facility, but fortunately at a time that didn't really impact the issues in the case. I feel very lucky, very blessed that I do what I do. As I've mentioned before, being on the side of justice is very satisfying. The definite majority of my cases are plaintiff cases. And I hope to be able to continue this work as long as I'm able. And I hope that I thank Richard and staff for allowing me to come and talk to you about what I do and help me to prepare the slideshows as well, the PowerPoint presentation. And also, as I said before, I do use LTCCC as a resource in helping me to develop my case. So I'm lucky, I'm blessed, and I'm ready for questions and answers.
Great. Well, thanks so much. Thanks so much, Julian. We got a lot of questions. I tried to answer a few of them, but we have plenty left for you. And thanks so much. That was so interesting. Before we get started on Q&A, we just a couple of housekeeping items for the end of our program. Our next webinar is on March 19th at 1 p.m. Eastern. We're actually going to be our program is going to be on a study that we recently participated in that actually gets at some of the things that Julian was talking about, and that is it was a study, excuse me, of nursing home cost reports, and it looks at nursing homes finances, profits, where the money is going, and the extent to which money is going to related parties, which Julian mentioned as well. And it was really a fascinating study. It was published in a peer-reviewed journal just around Christmas time, and I think I think we have a link to it on our website. But it's really a tremendous study that I was honored to participate in. So one of our researchers will be presenting on that study on March 19th at 1 p.m. Next slide, please.
Before we start,
yes.
first of all, I'd like to add a little senior wisdom to the program. And this is a quote: "It's important to have a twinkle in your wrinkle."
Thank you, Julie.
Keep that in mind. And secondly, my email address is on one of the slides. And some of the questions that may come to me might be better answered by email. And I'm very happy to take telephone calls. For those of you that might want to send me an email, I'm happy to call you directly and have discussions. So
thanks, Julian. And Haley
thank you.
reposted your email now in the chat. And again, it'll be at the start of the slide deck, like slide 3 or 4, I think, which will be on our website as well. So before we move on to Q&A, again, as I mentioned at the start, please check us out on social media. We have a new Instagram new account, excuse me. If you scan the QR code on the screen, you can access it there. Next slide, please. And then head to nursinghomeforum11.org, our website, to register for March's webinar, for materials from today's webinar, and then follow us on Instagram for updates, upcoming webinars, and more. On our Learning Center, we have fact sheets on key nursing home standards, including our Dementia Care Advocacy Toolkit. We have assisted living guides. We have a number of family empowerment resources and our family empowerment and family council development project. And we have a resident abuse, neglect, and crime reporting center, which provides information on, I know this came up in some of the questions too, what is abuse, what is neglect, how does one identify it, and what can one do about it? You can find out a lot of information there on that webpage. So without further ado, I want to move to some questions. Oh, and again, thank you for joining us. And for updates, please scan the QR code. Are there any more slides? Ellie or Eric, or can we move forward? There we go.
Nope, we're all set with Q&A.
Thanks so much. So the first question is from Tim Dibble. What is a family member's ability under the law to get documentation regarding care? The particular facility has tremendous difficulty providing copies of medications, vitals, activity reports, etc. for my mother's family care and neurologist. The last two times the outside providers complained that the records were less than useless.
Unfortunately, I have found cases where there are gaps in documentation. All the more reason to get the ombudsperson involved as quickly as possible. There are regulations that vary from state to state, and that ombuds program would, I think, be able to be helpful in letting you know what the regulations are. What typically happens is that a family member, a responsible party, a guardian, will sign a document that says that they want copies of the facilities documentation, the chart, and so forth. And unfortunately, uh, that can be a more difficult process. And again, I don't want to say that you must involve a lawyer, but I would say before you involve a lawyer, check with the the ombudsperson to see if that can help, providing some enlightenment as to how you can access the records. But it's shocking to me. It absolutely is shocking to me when I find that there are gaps in the records. The sooner that you request a letter, the documentation, the better.
Thank you. Thanks, Julian. Mary Swinford asked a question that actually relates to her state, but it is something that I've seen in other states as well. Have you heard of county hospitals owning nursing facilities and assisted living facilities? In Indiana, we have a large majority of nursing facilities owned by county hospitals. We believe they use the profits from the nursing facility to go to the hospital. Just wondering about your opinion on this practice and if it happens in other states. And I would just add that the county hospital situation, I think, is pretty specific to Indiana. However, we do see in the national data that there are a lot of not-for-profit facilities and even government-owned facilities that do have serious, if not ownership relationships, then management relationships with private entities. And so we do see some money going there. But anyway, I didn't mean to digress, but this is an issue that happens in communities across the country, unfortunately.
Yeah, I agree with you about Indiana. They seem to be unique in that regard. And there are sprinklings of government-owned facilities. But all too often, what may have originally been intended as a way of providing good continuity of care and having hospital therapy programs providing the services in a nursing home becomes an issue of dollar and cents. And that speaks to how the world of hospitals has changed. I mean, I mentioned before that when I finished graduate school, I was in the hospital field for several years and then had a wonderful opportunity to go into senior care. And I worked in nonprofit hospitals. But nowadays, the dollar signs are just becoming more and more important. And if there's a way in which a nursing home can generate revenue for the hospital, they're going to figure it out. So if that answers the question.
Thanks very much. Hillary Bennett asked, what do you recommend as the next step if you have an ineffective executive administrator that withholds information, outright lies at times, and the board doesn't seem to care, and allows that person to continue this behavior? The board was approached with specific issues and did absolutely nothing to correct it. The family council is trying to make changes, but they're at a loss as to where to go next.
Every state has an 800 number for submitting complaints to the Department of Public Health or Department of Health. And that is something that people need to understand. And the ombudsperson should be able to provide that information and help to facilitate that process. There are also ways in which you can submit a complaint to a state board of registration of nursing home administrators, because nursing home administrators are required to maintain a license in every state. And there's no reason why you can't provide or you can't submit a complaint against that particular person. Again, I don't mean to be patting myself on the back, but I've been doing this for many years, and it just shocks me to see how some of the younger people have come into this field under the control of ownership, who are dictating what they should do and what they should say and so forth. Again, maybe it's one of the reasons why I focused on the nonprofit sector, because I had more of a way of working more independently and not someone looking over my shoulder all the time. But again, how some of these owners control their people to act in a certain manner is disturbing. And but there are mechanisms available that one should take advantage of, whether it's the 800 number into the State Department of Public Health or Office of Elder Affairs. I'm using Massachusetts terms, but it's synonymous with other states as well.
Thanks. And if I may, I would just add that every state has a Medicaid fraud control unit, and every
right.
which is usually
Thank you.
housed in the state attorney general's office. And those Medicaid fraud control units all have a abuse and neglect hotline, so you can contact them. And I often recommend that when there is an issue, because sometimes people don't get a great response, frankly, from their Department of Health or Department of Public Health. But the Medicaid fraud control units they're not able to invest every single incident, but if they don't investigate it, my understanding is they will turn that over to the State Department of Health. So it's another good way of getting in there. And we have those numbers. As I mentioned before, we have a page on our website dedicated to identifying and reporting abuse and neglect and crimes against residents. And that is available, that information is available on that page. The next question is from Jan Shelley. I think I didn't ask this yet. What are the federal laws, if any, that allow residents a cause of action to redress abuse or neglect in their residence? Excuse me.
Could you repeat that,
I'm
Richard?
sorry. What are the federal laws, if any, that allow residents a cause of action to redress abuse or neglect in their residence?
People that work in senior care facilities are mandated to report not just abuse or neglect, but suspected abuse and neglect. And there's a hotline that goes to the state that will often result in the state coming in to do an investigation. I know that one of the issues that has come up, not only in my years of operating facilities, but also in my work as an expert, people can be very reluctant to report something bad because they fear retaliation. And it's an understandable issue, especially with frail seniors that may not have the ability to be able to put together a complaint. But again, make use of the ombudsperson, and often that it gives you a resource to be able to deal with the potential retaliation. I just saw someone wrote retaliation is real. Absolutely, absolutely, and it can manifest itself in ways that are sad and disturbing. But hopefully, when these complaints go in, they're anonymous. But all too often, the staff can sometimes figure out that it's coming from a particular person. And there's some residents that are more vocal than others. And sometimes the staff looks upon their being vocal as a way of them, reflecting their behavior, but not necessarily something that really requires their attention.
Thanks, Julian. And I would say one strong way of overcoming the fear of retaliation, I think, is to work with a resident council or family council. And that's why we're doing our project. Haley, Eric, if you could post the link in the chat, or Janine, I know you're on, is that we have people that are working with families directly, and that can help them. And by working through a family council, it's not just one person complaining about an issue traceable to their family. It is a council coming out with the complaint. So that's another possibility. I know it's 1:55, so I'm going to skip over a couple of questions. Sorry about that, folks. this is an anonymous attendee, what are the underlying reasons causing settlement of cases?
Uh, I would say sometimes it's just the facts in the case and the opinions of the expert, not just myself, but other experts as well. Uh, I think that for the sake of families, people don't necessarily want to have to go to trial. Insurance companies are intimately involved in making settlement decisions. And I would like to think that insurance companies are aware of facts in a case that would indicate that if they go to court, it's going to be much to their disadvantage, because chances are a jury would be sympathetic to the point where the jury judgment would be in excess of the settlement.
Thanks, Julian. It's 1:56, so I think just a couple, hopefully 2 or 3 more questions. One is there a single point of contact organization to find experts who do what you do?
There are a variety of agencies. I frankly, I don't have a website. I just fortunately have a pretty good network. I'm not looking for my presentation to generate more cases. I've got plenty to keep me busy, and one of the things that I'm very pleased about is having a good number of attorneys that I work with on a regular basis, that I have several cases with. I also enjoy being able to take on a case with a personal injury attorney that's never done a nursing home case, because then I can be sort of an educator. Then I can be a real expert to that particular attorney. But there are a number of attorneys out there, I would say well over 100, that specialize in the world of senior care and do a lot of nursing homes. The American Association for Justice, that represents litigation attorneys, plaintiff attorneys, they have a subsection on senior care, nursing homes, nationally, and also in certain states, where nursing home attorneys will get together and have presentations so that attorneys can get their education towards maintaining their certifications as well. And I've participated in some of those programs as well.
Thanks, Julian. One quick answer, a question which I think I can answer, if I may. Someone asked about the issue of administrators being ultimately responsible for the allocation of resources and for a citation for that. We actually have a fact sheet on that. So if you go to our website, nursinghomefour11.org and Learning Center, you can scroll through, and we have the responsibilities of the administrator. That includes, of course, the citation for the federal code, as well as for the FTAG. Another question was from Arlene Germain, I thought was really interesting. What have you seen? What have you seen regarding involvement or lack thereof of medical directors, an important position that too often is ineffective? And many thanks for a great presentation.
Again, I don't mean to get on the soapbox, because I could talk at length of all the years that I was in the field, of all the facilities I operated, although I was good enough and fortunate enough to be able to spend a lot of years in one particular facility. Unfortunately, there are very few medical directors out there that have a geriatric experience. If I recall reading or hearing it at one point in my career, the medical schools do not do a good job to teach geriatric medicine. Therefore, there are very few specialists. There is a national organization. It used to be called the American Medical Directors Association. Now it has a new name that I've forgotten for the moment. And those physicians that are involved in those organizations are the best medical directors. I've had medical directors, and I've told them, please join this organization. We'll pay your dues. It will make you a medical director. But all too often, the medical directors in many of these facilities are mediocre at best. And I'm not a physician, maybe I'm not in a position to judge, but when I hear from the nursing staff that Dr. X called in and said, well, get those charts ready for me, I want to sign off on them, but didn't visit any of the residents who were more critically ill, that tells me there's a problem. And I've had issues in facilities where I insisted on actually terminating a contract with the medical director because they didn't really do much other than signing off on the chart. So that's another reason why I mentioned before the importance of looking at a medical director's contract to see if they're doing what they're supposed to be doing and what they've agreed to.
Thanks, Julian. It's 2:00. I think just one quick question. Roxanne asked if these cases are civil rather than criminal. They're civil. That's what we're talking about here. But there can be criminal cases against nursing homes too, and that would be undertaken by, as I mentioned before, the Medicaid Fraud Control Unit, the Attorney General's office on the state level or on the federal level, or the Department of Justice. But Julian, thank you very much. Lots of questions. You're very generous with your time with us and to offer to speak with people after this program. Before we go, I just want to give a shout out to our own Eric Goldwine. Eric is leaving at the end of the month, which is just in a few days. And Eric has been really instrumental totally instrumental in doing the podcast, which he hosted, and in putting together these webinars and all of our data, et cetera. So our hats off to Eric, and with thank you, Eric.
Thank you all. I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks to
everyone
everybody.
for joining us. Thank you, Julian, very much. We appreciate it. Again, the recording will be available on our website and our YouTube channel, along with all the recordings from our past programs. Free.
And don't forget, put
Yeah.
a twinkle in your wrinkle.
Thank you, Julian.
And if you do write me, I'll get to you as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye now.
Bye.